The pod's hatch opened with a hiss, a gust of frigid air whisking out to swirl with the blizzard. The alien woman half tumbled, half crawled out, collapsing to her hands and knees in the snow. Her breath misted in rapid, shallow pants, long strands of ink-black hair clinging wetly to her neck and shoulders. Easy, easy there, Hayden said, instinctively reaching out to support her. She flinched at his touch but didn't pull away, a soft whimper escaping her throat. Up close, he could see her bodysuit was actually some kind of emergency thermal wrap, its heat-reflecting surfaces torn and burned in several places. Angry purple bruises mottled her arms and legs. Zilk grav, she gasped, her voice low and musical despite the obvious pain. She pointed a trembling finger at the pod's interior. Kylith Ra. Hayden looked to where she pointed and saw a small device lying in the footwell, its casing cracked but its status lights still blinking. A communicator of some kind? A translator? He grabbed it just in case and helped the woman to her feet. She sagged against him, her skin cold even through his suit. Hypothermia was setting in fast. Hayden knew if he couldn't get her warmed up in the next few minutes, she'd slip into a torpid state from which she'd likely never wake up. He'd seen it happen before, to soldiers and civilians alike on a dozen icebound battlefields. Shouldering her weight, he half-carried, half-dragged her over to a rocky overhang he'd spotted before, its wind-sculpted surface providing a modicum of shelter from the gale. Propping her up against it, he unslung his survival pack and rummaged inside for his emergency thermal blanket, a paper-thin sheet of heat-reflective polymer that could unfold to a 2-meter square. He draped it around her shoulders, swaddling her as best he could. She clutched at it weakly, another alien word slipping from her lips. Vassal. The translator device in Hayden's hand suddenly crackled, its tiny speaker sputtering to life. GR, grateful. Hayden blinked, it worked, he held the device closer. Can you understand me? He asked, speaking slowly and clearly. Are you injured? What's your name? The device buzzed, tiny lights flickering as it processed his words. A moment later, it spat out a string of liquid syllables, the alien woman's native tongue. Her eyes widened and she nodded, replying haltingly. I understand, yes, the translator box said, its tinny rendition of her voice lightly accented but clear. I am injured but not deathly. She placed a hand on her side over the bloodstain. I am called Lyra Visari. You are human from the Alliance. Hayden nodded, surprised and relieved she recognized his species. Lieutenant Hayden Stark, ASV Reliant, my ship crashed here too. Lyra glanced away, her eyes unfocusing slightly as a violent shiver racked her body. My shuttle, attacked, had to escape. Her voice grew fainter, the words starting to slur together. So cold. Hey, stay with me. Hayden gave her a gentle shake, trying to keep her conscious. He could feel the chill starting to penetrate his own suit, a bone-deep ache settling into his joints. The thermal blanket alone wouldn't be enough, not in these conditions. Is there shelter nearby? Caves? Anything? Lyra nodded weakly. Caves, to the west, not far but must move quickly. Storm worsens, beasts will come. As if to underscore her warning, a keening alien howl drifted out of the whiteout, rising over the wind. It was answered by another, closer. The cries made the hairs on the back of Hayden's neck stand up. Right, caves it is. Pocketing the translator, he pulled Lyra close, wrapping an arm around her waist. Her skin, where it peeked through the rents in her thermal wrap, was so pale it was almost translucent. Stay close and keep moving, we'll make it. She leaned into him, her weight slight but her will strong. Those silver eyes met his, now shining with determination and gratitude amidst the pain. Thank you, she whispered, the translator catching it a beat later, for saving me. Something shifted in Hayden's chest, a tightness that had nothing to do with the cold. He nodded curtly. Thank me when we're safe, now move double time. Together, they staggered out into the blizzard, chasing the fatting promise of shelter, warmth, and survival against the howling dark. Here is part 2 of the story. Part 2, Icy Perils. The blizzard raged around Hayden and Lyra as they trudged through the deepening snow, leaning into each other for support. Hayden kept one arm locked around Lyra's waist, half carrying her as she stumbled along beside him. Her breaths came in short, pained gasps, little clouds of mist that were instantly whipped away by the wind. Come on, stay with me, Hayden urged, giving her a gentle shake. He could feel her growing heavier, her movements more sluggish with each passing minute. Which way to those caves? Lyra lifted a trembling hand, pointing off into the white haze ahead. There, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind's howl. Behind the great ridgeline. Hayden squinted, trying to make out any landmark in the swirling snow. For a moment, he thought it was hopeless. Then, as if summoned by Lyra's words, a dark shape materialized out of the blizzard, a towering cliff face, its jagged outline just visible through the icy murk. I see it, fresh determination surged through Hayden's veins, momentarily pushing back the bone-deep ache of the cold. He adjusted his grip on Lyra and quickened his pace, half dragging her through the knee-deep drifts. Just a little further, we're almost there. But even as he spoke the words, a new sound reached his ears, a deep, ululating cry that seemed to echo from the very heart of the storm. It was answered by another, then another, the eerie chorus growing louder with each passing second. Beside him, Lyra shuddered. "Vrex," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear, "they've caught our scent." "Vrex," Hayden's hand dropped to the pulse pistol at his hip, though he doubted the weapon would be much use in these conditions. "What are Vrex?" "Predators, hunters of the ice." Lyra's gaze darted back and forth, searching the swirling snow. "In storm they grow, bold, desperate, will attack anything that moves." As if to punctuate her words, a massive shape suddenly burst from the whiteout behind them, all tooth and claw and mottled white fur. It moved with terrifying speed, loping across the snow on 6 powerful legs, its eyeless head swinging back and forth as it zeroed in on its prey. "Run!" Hayden didn't wait to see if Lyra heard him. He grabbed her hand and sprinted for the cliffs, adrenaline flooding his system as he plowed through the drifts. He could hear the wreck behind them, its hungry cries mingling with the howl of the wind. It was gaining fast, its powerful strides devouring the distance between them. Lyra stumbled, crying out in pain as her injured leg buckled beneath her. Hayden hauled her back to her feet, practically carrying her now as they raced for the cliffs. The Vrek's hot breath billowed against his neck, the stench of its musk filling his nostrils. He could almost feel its jaws closing around his throat. At the last second, he veered hard to the left, dragging Lyra with him. The Vrek's leap carried it past them, its massive bulk slamming into a snowbank with a frustrated roar. Hayden didn't slow, running flat out for the cliff face that loomed ahead. They reached the base of the cliff just as the Vrek recovered, its eyeless head swinging toward them once more. Hayden scanned the rock wall desperately, searching for any sign of an opening. There, a narrow crack in the stone, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Inside, quickly, he shoved Lyra toward the crevice, placing himself between her and the charging Vrek. The creature was almost upon them, its razor-lined maw gaping wide. Hayden raised his pulse pistol, knowing he'd only have one shot. The gun bucked in his hand, its electric whine lost in the Vrek's roar of pain as the charged bolt struck it square between its eyeless sockets. The beast stumbled, its charge faltering as smoke poured from its blasted skull. But still it came on, maddened by pain and hunger. Hayden dragged Lyra back, wedging them both into the narrow mouth of the cave just as the dying Vrek slammed into the cliff face. Its massive body blocked the opening, trapping them in darkness as its death throes shook the very stone around them. Hayden wrapped himself around Lyra, shielding her as chunks of ice and rock rained down, the Vrek's final roars mingling with the scream of the wind outside. Then, as abruptly as it began, it was over. The Vrek slumped lifelessly against the cliff, its bulk still sealing the cave mouth. In the sudden silence, the only sounds were their own ragged breathing and the faint, distant keening of the Vrek's pack mates somewhere out in the storm. Lyra sagged against Hayden's chest, her strength spent. You saved us," she whispered, her voice muffled by the folds of his thermal cloak. "For now," Hayden agreed grimly. He cast a wary glance at the Vrek's corpse, then up at the dark tunnel that stretched away behind them, vanishing into the heart of the mountain. Somewhere in that lightless labyrinth was the sanctuary Lyra had promised. But as Hayden held her shivering body close, listening to the hungry cries of the Vreks echoing through the storm outside, he couldn't shake the feeling that their ordeal. Darkness pressed in from all sides as Hayden and Lyra made their way deeper into the mountain, following the narrow, winding tunnel that burrowed through the rock. The only light came from the dim glow of Hayden's wrist lamp, its weak beam barely enough to illuminate the path ahead. Lyra leaned heavily on Hayden's arm, her breath coming in shallow, pained gasps. The thermal wrap around her slender frame was torn and stained with fresh blood, the fabric sticking to her wounds. Hayden could feel the heat of her fever even through his own insulated suit. "Just a little further," he urged, though in truth he had no idea how deep the tunnels ran or where they might lead. "We'll find a place to rest soon." Lyra nodded weakly, her silver eyes glazed and unfocused in the lamplight. She mumbled something in her native tongue, the words too low for Hayden's translator to pick up. Minutes stretched into hours as they stumbled through the lightless labyrinth, their path twisting and turning until Hayden was hopelessly disoriented. The air grew warmer as they descended, the chill of Zephyria Prime's surface giving way to a deep geothermal heat. Strange lichens clung to the tunnel walls, their bioluminescent fronds casting an eerie blue glow. Just as Hayden was beginning to fear they'd wandered into an inescapable maze, the tunnel abruptly opened up into a vast, echoing cavern. Towering columns of stone rose from the chamber's floor to its distant, vaulted ceiling, like the pillars of some ancient, underground temple. Steaming pools of milky blue water dotted the cavern floor, fed by bubbling hot springs. The sanctuary of Kelidon, Lyra breathed, her eyes widening with wonder and recognition. I never thought I'd see it with my own eyes. Hayden eased her down to sit on a flat, weathered stone beside one of the pools. You know this place. She nodded, wincing as the movement pulled at her injuries. It's a legend among my people, a sacred refuge built by our ancestors long ago. Her slender fingers traced the worn grooves and channels carved into the cavern floor, forming intricate, swirling patterns. The markings, the springs, it's just as the old tales described. Hayden frowned, unease prickling along his spine. If Lyra's people knew of this place, then it stood to reason her enemies might as well. And if they'd tracked her damaged escape pod. He was just reaching for his pulse pistol when a searing lance of emerald light split the cavern's gloom, stabbing out from a shadowed alcove on the far side of the chamber. The energy bolt sizzled over Hayden's shoulder, missing him by a hairsbreadth as he dove aside, dragging Lyra down behind the stone block. Sunvok's assassins, Lyra cried out, her eyes wide with fear and betrayal. They've found us. Hayden cursed, adrenaline surging through his veins as he raised his own weapon to return fire. The assassins were good, their mottled gray stealth suits blending almost perfectly with the cavern's shadows. Only the glow of their blaster muzzles and the heat shimmers of their outlines gave away their positions. Stay down, Hayden ordered, placing himself between Lyra and the assassins. His military-grade pulse pistol was more powerful than their sleek blasters, but he was badly outgunned and they had the advantage of numbers and position. Ember beams stitched the stone around them as Hayden fired back, the acrid tang of ozone filling the air. He dropped one assassin with a direct hit to the chest, the man's suit rupturing in a spray of molten composite. But two more took his place, pouring a withering hail of fire toward Hayden and Lyra's position. Lyra cried out in pain as a glancing shot seared across her thigh, the wound angry and blistered. Hayden's gut clenched, a cold fury settling over him. He triggered his gun's power cell to overload and hurled it toward the assassins, diving to cover Lyra with his own body. The pulse pistol detonated in a blinding flash, the shockwave slamming Hayden to the ground and filling the air with pulverized rock dust. Silence descended in the wake of the blast, broken only by the hiss of steam from the ruptured hot springs. Hayden raised his head cautiously, squinting through the haze of debris. The assassins' broken bodies lay strewn across the cavern floor, their suits ruptured and smoldering. For a moment, it appeared they were clear. Then a final figure stumbled from the shadows, clutching a gaping wound in his side. His eyes locked with Hayden's, burning with hatred and a fanatic's zeal. He raised his blaster in a trembling hand, aiming not at Hayden but at Lyra. For the glory of Sunvok, he hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Hayden lunged, drawing the vibroknife from his boot and hurling it across the chamber. The razor-sharp blade buried itself in the assassin's throat, cutting off his final curse in a wet gurgle. He toppled backward, the blaster bolt going wide to scorch the ceiling as his body hit the floor. In the ringing silence that followed, Hayden turned to gather Lyra in his arms, cradling her close as he checked her wound. It was painful but not life-threatening. She looked up at him, her silver eyes shining with unshed tears. You saved me, she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and something else, something deeper. Again. Hayden swallowed hard, his heart pounding with more than just the fatting rush of battle. I think it's becoming a habit. She reached up to touch his cheek, her azure skin warm against his. One I could get used to. In that moment, with the adrenaline still singing in his veins and Lyra's soft body pressed against his, Hayden felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in a long, long time. Something that felt perilously close to hope, and maybe even the stirrings of love. But as he held her gaze, he couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. The assassins had found them once. They would find them again. And next time, Hayden might not be enough to keep Lyra safe. In the flickering light of the glowstones, Hayden tended to Lyra's wounds as best he could, using strips of fabric torn from his thermal cloak as makeshift bandages. The alien woman remained stoic throughout, only the occasional sharp intake of breath betraying the pain she felt. "These caves," Hayden said as he worked, his eyes roaming over the ancient, carved walls. "You said your people built them long ago." Lyra nodded, wincing as Hayden tightened a bandage around her thigh. "Thousands of years ago, before we took to the stars. The sanctuary was a place of healing and refuge, protected by the warmth of the hot springs and the strength of the mountain." Hayden frowned, his fingers tracing the intricate patterns etched into the stone. They seemed to flow and swirl before his eyes, hinting at some greater meaning just beyond his grasp. "But there's more to it than that, isn't there? Your assassins wouldn't have pursued you here just for some musty old caves." Lyra hesitated, conflict flickering in her silver eyes. "No," she admitted softly. "The sanctuary was built to house something far more valuable, something my people have sought to protect for generations." She pushed herself to her feet, limping toward the far wall of the cavern. Hayden followed, his curiosity piqued. Lyra ran her fingers over the carvings, pressing and twisting in a complex pattern. With a deep rumble, a section of the wall slid aside, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. Hayden's breath caught in his throat. The chamber was filled with technology unlike anything he'd ever seen: sleek consoles and glowing displays, all seamlessly integrated into the living rock. At the center of it all stood a towering machine, its curved arms cradling a pulsing sphere of pure, radiant energy. "The heart of Kelaidin," Lyra whispered, her voice hushed with reverence. "The source of our people's power and our greatest secret." Hayden stared at the alien device, trying to wrap his mind around the magnitude of what he was seeing. This is incredible. With technology like this, your people could conquer the galaxy," Lyra finished, a sad smile touching her lips. "Yes, that is what Sunvok desires, what he's willing to kill for." She limped closer to the machine, placing her hand on its thrumming surface. The energy within seemed to respond to her touch, glowing brighter. "But the heart was never meant to be a weapon. It is a gift, a tool for understanding and enlightenment. That is what the sanctuary was built to protect and what my family has sworn to defend for generations." Hayden stepped up beside her, marveling at the play of light beneath his own fingers as he touched the machine. "And that's why you were targeted, because you stand in the way of Sunvok's ambition." Lyra nodded, her shoulders slumping under the weight of her burden. "I am the last of the Kelaidin line, the last keeper of the heart's secrets. Sunvok will not rest until I am dead, and the heart is in his grasp." Hayden's hand found hers, his fingers lacing with hers atop the machine's surface. The contact sent a pleasant tingle up his arm. "Then we'll just have to make sure that doesn't happen. I'm not letting you face this alone, Lyra, not anymore." She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the heart's glow. "You would stand with me, against Sunvok and all the might of his empire." Without hesitation, Hayden said, and realized he meant it with every fiber of his being. "After all, we've come this far together, might as well see it through to the end." Slowly, tentatively, Lyra leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder as they stood before the heart's radiance. "Thank you, Hayden," she murmured, "for everything." Hayden wrapped his arm around her, holding her close as he stared into the alien light of the heart. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, what battles they would have to fight. But he did know one thing. Whatever came, they would face it together. The heart of Kelaidin pulsed with ancient power, bathing the hidden chamber in an otherworldly glow. Hayden and Lyra stood before it, hand in hand, transfixed by the play of energy within the alien device's core. "It's beautiful," Hayden murmured, his voice hushed with awe. "I've never seen anything like it." Lyra nodded, her silver eyes reflecting the heart's radiance. "It is the greatest treasure of my people, a conduit to the very fabric of the universe itself." She turned to face Hayden, her expression grave. "And it is what Sunvok will stop at nothing to possess." Hayden squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. "We won't let that happen. We'll find a way to keep the heart safe, to stop Sunvok and his assassins." But even as he spoke the words, a cold knot of doubt formed in his gut. They were alone, stranded on a hostile world with an entire empire hunting them. What chance did they really have? As if in answer to his unspoken question, a deep rumble suddenly shook the chamber, sending dust and pebbles raining down from the ceiling. Hayden and Lyra exchanged an alarmed glance. "What was that?" Hayden asked, his hand instinctively going to the empty holster at his hip. Before Lyra could reply, another tremor rocked the cavern, stronger this time. Cracks appeared in the ancient stone, the carved walls groaning under the strain. Sunvok, Lyra whispered, her face paling, he's found us. Hayden's mind raced, desperately searching for a plan. They couldn't stay here, the sanctuary's defenses were formidable, but they wouldn't hold against a determined assault. And with the heart here, Sunvok would throw everything he had at them. His gaze fell on the alien machine, an idea sparking to life. It was desperate, reckless even, but it might just be their only chance. Lyra, he said urgently, pulling her toward the heart. Can this thing be moved? Is there a way to transport it? She blinked, confusion and fear warring in her eyes. I don't know. The legends never spoke of the heart being removed from the sanctuary. It may not even be possible. Another boom shook the chamber, closer this time. Hayden could hear the whine of energy weapons, the shouts of Sunvok's soldiers as they stormed the mountain. We have to try, he insisted. If we can get the heart to my ship, get it off-world, then maybe we have a chance. We can take it to the Alliance, use it to bargain for protection for asylum. Lyra hesitated, her gaze torn between Hayden and the pulsing alien artifact. But the heart belongs to my people. It is our legacy, our birthright, to remove it from the sanctuary, from Zephyria Prime itself. Hayden gripped her shoulders, staring intently into her eyes. I know, believe me, I understand what I'm asking, but Lyra, if Sunvok gets the heart, if he uses it for war and conquest, how many will suffer, how many will die? Tears glimmered on her cheeks, but behind them Hayden saw a flicker of resolve, of grim determination. Slowly she nodded. You are right, she whispered. The heart's true purpose is to protect life, not destroy it. If this is the only way to keep it from Sunvok's grasp, then it is what we must do. Together they turned to the alien machine. Lyra placed her hands on its surface, her brow furrowing in concentration as she murmured in her native tongue. The heart seemed to pulse in response, its glow intensifying until Hayden had to shield his eyes. With a hiss of releasing energy, the machine's curved arms retracted, the sphere of radiant power at its core floating free. Gently, almost reverently, Lyra took it in her hands. Quickly, she said, her voice strained with effort and emotion, we must hurry. They ran, Lyra cradling the heart to her chest as Hayden led the way back through the winding tunnels. All around them, the sanctuary shook and crumbled, its ancient power spent in one final act of defiance. They burst from the mountain just as Sunvok's forces reached the cavern entrance, a hail of blaster fire chasing them across the icy plain. Hayden's ship was where he'd left it, half buried in the snow. He prayed its systems were still functional. Stumbling up the ramp, they collapsed into the cockpit, Hayden's fingers flying over the controls. The engines coughed, sputtered, then roared to life, the scout ship clawing its way skyward on plumes of blue plasma. Sunvok's ships were right behind them, their weapons hammering at the scouts' shields. But Hayden flew like a man possessed, weaving and dodging, pushing the small craft to its limits and beyond. The moment they cleared the atmosphere, he punched in the coordinates for Alliance space and engaged the hyperdrive. With a wrenching lurch, the stars blurred into streaks of light and Zephyria Prime fell away behind them. In the sudden silence of hyperspace, Hayden slumped back in his seat, his heart pounding. Beside him, Lyra cradled the heart of Kelaiden, her eyes closed in silent prayer. We did it, Hayden breathed, scarcely able to believe it. We actually did it. Lyra opened her eyes, a small, tentative smile touching her lips. Thanks to you, your courage, your compassion. She reached out, her fingers twinning with his. I have never known anyone like you, Hayden Stark. He returned her smile, feeling a warmth bloom in his chest that had nothing to do with the rush of their escape. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing about you. They held each other's gaze for a long moment, the weight of all they had been through, all they had sacrificed, hanging between them. Hayden knew their journey was far from over, there would be challenges ahead, dangers and difficult choices. But he also knew, with a certainty that went soul-deep, that they would face them together. That the bond they had forged through fire and ice and the heat of battle was stronger than any force in the galaxy. And in the end, that was all that mattered.